Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to get some of the electrics sorted on the Caterham. There's also a couple of things we're going to do with the body, but first of all, we need to look at the electrics and specifically the fuel pump. We obviously need to get the fuel to the engine. I have a fuel pump there, but it's not connected. Unfortunately, this car originally had an engine with a mechanical fuel pump. We don't have that on the twin cam, so we need a fuel pump that's been installed. Now it needs to be connected. So I bought a wiring kit, fuse, relay and wiring, and I need to wire up the fuel pump. What you can see here is the fuel tank. You can see that the fuel sender has been connected up. There was a wiring loom connection for that. And we have a fuel pump here on the side with a wire connection. Okay, we're sitting in the driver's seat of the Caterham. You can see here that we don't have the instruments at all, and we have the wiring loom visible behind through the holes in the dash. What I've done, I've ascertained where the ignition switch goes, which is through there, and I needed to find a place where to mount the ignition switch. Unfortunately, the wiring loom limits the places that you can put it in. For example, we could have put it here, but there are also standard things like the blinkers that need to go there. I can't put it between the oil pressure and coolant temperature gauges. There just isn't enough physical room. And where there is room, the wiring loom isn't long enough to fit. So the question is, where do we actually mount the ignition switch? Many Caterhams don't, as far as I could tell, don't have an ignition switch mounted in their dash at all. The ones that I saw on the web. And this bracing is just big enough to fit the ignition switch. So here's the ignition switch. And if you put it in, you'll see that it just fits. And to be honest, I believe that is a really good place for the ignition switch. It's on the left-hand side, but it's out of the way. And it just gives me normal functionality of the car via the ignition switch. So I drilled a hole, being very careful to get it in the right spot, and it worked out pretty well. Along similar lines, you can see here behind the steering wheel, there are provisions for a lever switch here. But if you put your hands on the wheel, the knuckles would always hit that switch. So I bought some push buttons, and that's now the headlight flasher, which I can operate while I've got my hands on the wheel. And on the other side, I needed to find a provision for the horn. Again, looking at various dashboards, I just couldn't see where they mounted the horn. So what I did, I just symmetrically on the other side, I again mounted a push button switch for the horn. And we have the blinkers in a normal position, so when I'm driving, I can just flick the blinkers on or off. I've removed the steering wheel. We have a quick release here, and I've provisionally mounted both the speedo and the tacho. Both of these instruments are VDO instruments, and they're both electronic. The tacho shouldn't be any problem, just the connection to the coil should do it, but the speedo is a problem. The speedo can either be fed with a mechanical signal, and I have another speedo which has a cable connection. However, the gearbox, the Quaife gearbox, doesn't have provision for a speedo cable at all, so that's a non-starter. This particular speedo from VDO can take input from 3 different types of sensors. An inductive sensor, so have a magnet on a rotating part of the tail shaft or the wheel. A Hall effect sensor where it would just detect something metal rotating past it, again on the tail shaft or the wheel, or a GPS sender. My preference would be to have either an inductive or a Hall effect sensor, because that is connected to the car. It doesn't rely on any satellites working. Unfortunately, the tail shaft has nipples on it in order to grease the universal joints on the tail shaft. So that really prevented either an inductive or a Hall effect sensor on the tail shaft. And on the wheel, I didn't want to put it on the front wheel because the brakes might get hot. On the rear wheel, there was just No, it's a solid axle with drum brakes. There just wasn't that much room. So I decided to go with a GPS sender. And this is the one I bought, and this is from VDO again. And I need to mount this somewhere so that it's got clear line of sight to the sky. Now obviously I can put it on top of the dash, but that just looks odd. So I'll show you where I think I will mount the sensor. So we're back in the trunk area, and there are two places where this could go. First of all, just on this tray here, that would work. It has clear line of sight. We only have a fabric cover. However, it will just get in the way of any equipment I have in the trunk. What I'm thinking of is to make a bracket up here and mount it very close under here. You can see there's a cross member here. I can just make a little bracket and just mount it up there and then run the cable along the cross member underneath the car and then back into the dash. So that's a task that I will do in the near future. What you can see here is the pedal box. One thing that's missing is the brake switch. I bought one from Amazon. It's a Beck Arnley, and let me just have a look, see if I can get it to you. A 2011105. I'm about to install it. Okay, the brake switch is now installed. I had to put some washers to space it out correctly. I'll replace them with something a little more beautiful than that, but it seems to work fine. There's no real way to actually fix the bars to the inside of the cover, and I believe there's a couple of bars that are missing. So I need to chase that up, find out what is missing, and see whether I can get it from the previous owner. Okay, we're just going to trial mount the windscreen to see if it fits. This windscreen hasn't been on the car for quite a while, as the previous owner wanted to put Brooklyn's little windscreens on it. I decided to just put the conventional windscreen on it because I believe it offers better protection from the weather. So I've polished the top of the cowl. I will now put some cloth down and gently lower the windscreen on there and see how well it fits. Okay, we now have the windscreen installed. The car certainly looks a lot more classic than what it did previously. The rubber surround, the waterproofing around the bottom of the windscreen is quite old and perished. I'll probably have to replace that at some point. But I think the car looks great.